The sun had started to set by the time we made it back to the complex. Mercifully, it was still light out. For now. And after everything that had happened yesterday, the thought weighed heavily on my mind. But as we turned into the parking lot, my attention was promptly pulled elsewhere. What the? Looks like somebody's moving out. Hisamatsu-san peered through the passenger side window at the large truck occupying one corner of the lot. It was much larger than any delivery truck. That much was for certain. Where do I park? As it happened, the truck had situated itself directly over my assigned parking spot. Well, that's just rude. Let me hop out and take a quick look. Whoever it is, we should be able to see them hauling stuff out. Okay, sounds good. With that, Hisamatsu-san hopped out of the car and craned his neck up at the complex. Nearly all of the apartment doors were visible from his position. Just then, Hisamatsu-san's gaze settled on a single direction. Had he seen them? His expression was as hard as stone. Did he see the ghost? Do you see them? I quickly rolled down the window to call out to him, but he didn't respond. Instead, he walked right up to the driver's side door and opened it. What are you? He grabbed me by the shoulder, urging me to get out. It's 203. Huh? Wait, what? 203 is moving out. I understood immediately. Apartment 203 was directly adjacent to 202, and as with 201, 203 reputedly went through a lot of tenants. Without pausing to kill the engine, I whipped off my seatbelt as fast as I could, jumped out of the car, and dashed up to the second floor. On the way up, I passed a handful of movers carrying furniture downstairs. Once I reached 203, I found the door wide open. I ran up right as a man, likely the tenant, was on his way out. He appeared to be in his early 40s. He had a washcloth around his neck and a cardboard box in his hands. As soon as he spotted me, he shot me a suspicious look. Sorry to bother you. Are you moving out? Yeah, as you can see. His tone was gruff and defensive. He seemed tired. This was my first time meeting him, but I could tell he was worn out. As I lingered on the spot, his gaze turned hostile. Can I help you, lady? Actually, see, I just moved into apartment 201 yesterday. 201? That got his attention. Yeah, you probably don't recognize me since I haven't had the chance to introduce myself. Anyway, you sure seem to be moving out in a bit of a hurry, huh? It's none of your business, alright? Now kindly get out of my way. Excuse me? Hey! Talk about a bad attitude. The man forced his way past me, cardboard box in his arms. After witnessing the exchange, Hisamatsu-san turned back to the stairs. I'll talk to him about the parking situation. Would you? Thanks. He nodded and was about to head off when he froze, his gaze focused on something behind me. I turned to find a woman, likely the man's wife, standing at the entrance to 203. Do you need something? Oh, hi, my name's Yuki. I moved into 201 just yesterday. I see. She looked at me fearfully. As with her husband, she was carrying a cardboard box, though hers was smaller. I just got back from running errands, and, the truck outside is kind of in the way. Oh, I see. You need your parking space. Sorry for the wait, but I promise we're almost done here. She timidly moved past me. This move seems a bit sudden, don't you think? Change of jobs or something? At this, she visibly flinched. A change of jobs because the ghost decided to come pay them a visit. Like, hey, you got any detergent? Yes, something like that. Her voice was shaking, as was the rest of her. I could see her fingers tighten around the edges of her cardboard box. Okay, well, I'll just park in 202 space for now. This little comment was far more effective than I had anticipated. The instant 202 left my lips, the woman practically jumped out of her skin. Her box tumbled to the floor, and apparently shattered because there was glass in there. I heard a dull crunch as the item inside shattered. The woman was trembling too violently to notice. Hisamatsu-san scooped up the box and handed it to her. Just then, her husband reappeared behind her. Hey, Hisai, is that the last box? But Hisai didn't respond. The man took one look at his scared, shaking wife and paled. Hisai? What's the matter? Hisai? What did you people say to my wife? The man looked about ready to deck Hisamatsu-san in the face, but the bespectacled youth answered calmly. All he said was that we'd be waiting in 202's parking space until you're finished. It was the truth, after all. Thankfully, Hisamatsu-san had my back while I was too flustered to respond. Meanwhile, the man's expression softened. Oh, alright. We're nearly done now, so just sit tight for a little longer, please. An awkward tension hung in the air. Just then, a voice called out from inside 203. Takahashi-san! What would you like us to do about the newspapers in the walls and windows? Tear them down? It must have been one of the movers trying to help expedite the process. But Mr. and Mrs. Takahashi reacted violently. Leave them! Leave them! Curious, I peered inside and froze. Based on what I could see, the layout of their apartment was identical to mine. Their living room window was completely covered over with newspaper. Panicked, the man dashed back inside the apartment, then turned and nodded to us. We're nearly done here, so just wait downstairs for us, would you? Without waiting for a reply, the man slammed the doors shut and began to scream at the movers. Ooh! Leave it where it is, don't you touch it! Meanwhile, the three of us, myself, Hitsumatsu-san, and Takahashi-san's wife, trudged down to the first floor. I think that moving went well, you know, pretty quick. Once we arrived back at the parking lot, Hisai-san loaded her box into the truck and sat down on the bumper. She looked so exhausted I couldn't help but reach out to her. What happened in there? She looked up at me weakly, her lips twitching. Was she trying to smile? What made you put those newspapers up like that? I heard Hisamatsu-san call out from behind me. His shadow stretched across the asphalt as the sun continued to climb behind the horizon. Well, I suppose it doesn't really matter now that we're moving. Over her shoulder, I saw the landlady walk into 203. Maybe she wanted to say one last goodbye to her tenant. You said you moved into 201? I nodded. Yes, just yesterday, in fact. And it sucks, I hate it here. I tried to go around giving people detergent, and then I got spooked by a ghost. Oh, you poor thing. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. Her impending freedom seemed to bolster her courage to speak. We endured that hell for a year. An entire year of it. Well, we've been living out of a business hotel for a while now. I just couldn't take another day in that monstrous place. She attempted another smile, though whether out of scorn or fear, I wasn't certain. Could you tell me about what happened? Are you sure about this? Hisai-san's voice shook. It sounded less like a request for permission, and more like a warning. I'm going to have to go through it either way, so I might as well know what I'm up against. It was the honest truth, and it was this sentiment that motivated me into all that legwork today. You know, when I acted like a Karen. Hisai-san glanced up at me. Her expression was one of pity. Then she went back to staring at her hands. There's a woman. She seeps through the walls. She seeps through the walls? Slowly, bit by bit, inch by inch. I tried to picture it, but couldn't. It just didn't make any sense. Once we're gone, you should go pull the newspaper down from the walls, if you're feeling plucky. Then you'll see. What about from the windows? Hisamatsu-san, who had been quiet for some time, finally spoke. But I had a feeling I knew the answer. Her hand. Whose hand? The woman's hand. It crawls over the windows, and even if you close the curtains, you'll still see it. A shiver ran down my spine. What if the curtains are really, really thick? Hisai-san hopped off the truck and walked over to me, as if she sensed my fear. Then she pulled something from her pocket and pushed it into my hands. The landlady doesn't know I made this spare key. Once you've seen it, once you know what's coming, you should take shelter somewhere else. at least during the night. Her voice was quiet, yet impassioned. Moved by her entreaty, I cupped my right hand around hers. Moments later, I felt a small, metal object laid in my palm. I looked down at my hand to find myself holding a key, one that looked very similar to my own. Why are you giving this to me? Tell you the truth, I was planning to sell it to a paranormal magazine publisher, but that journalist stopped coming around, so I have no use for it now. I wasn't sure what to say. The key felt heavy in my hand. I could feel it practically begging to be used. Come on, Hisai. We're leaving. At the sudden voice, I realized her husband was standing beside the moving truck. Behind him, I could see the landlady heading back to her house, looking quite displeased. The man looked over at me. Sorry, but we've got to go now. Then he headed to his car and hopped inside as if he was washing his hands of the place entirely. Hisai-san watched him go, then turned back to us. Well, this is goodbye. Stay safe. Oh, you too, Takahashi-san. With a wave, she turned and climbed into her husband's car. No sooner had the passenger door shut than the car backed up and took off out of the parking lot, followed shortly by the moving truck. Left alone under the red glow of the sunset, I stared down wordlessly at the key in my hand. Want me to go park your car for you? His words brought me back to reality with a start. No, I can do it. I headed over to my car, all the while gazing up at apartment 203. The Takahashi family's fearful expressions lingered in my mind. Believe them! Believe them! What on earth were they so afraid of? We know what it is! She said the girl comes through the walls! Stuffing the key in my pocket, I climbed into the driver's seat. Chapter 12! Huh. Daigo. So, what are your plans for the key? I parked my car in the complex parking lot and hopped out. You mean the one to 203? Obviously, that was what he meant. Hisamatsu-san nodded and looked up at the second floor. There's no real rush per se, but if the landlady calls in house cleaning services tomorrow morning, that key will go completely to waste. He had a point. While it was unlikely she'd be able to fill the vacancy anytime soon, I knew there were always exceptions. Myself, for example. The apartment would be cleaned, the newspapers would be taken down, and eventually it would be as though nothing strange had ever happened. At that point, I would lose any chance I had of learning exactly what had taken place there. Assuming another tenant like Takahashi-san didn't turn up, that is. Let's just go. I'll be right there with you. Easy for you to say, I thought. But it's almost dark. You know? I mean, best time to check to see if there's a ghost there. Yeah, and once it's dark, we'll lose our nerve. So should we just make it quick? Okay, point taken. Come on, let's go. Huh? Whoa, hey! Apparently he wasn't about to take no for an answer. Hisamatsu-san slung an arm around my shoulder and set off toward the main entrance. I found myself having to half jog just to keep up with his stride. Slow down, Hisamatsu-san. Call me Daigo. Isn't it a little early to get that personal? We're partners in this investigation, aren't we? No biggie. Maybe not to you, but it was another story to me, actually. But before I could get the words out, he suddenly came to a stop. We had arrived at the freshly vacated apartment 203. The door seemed to tower menacingly before us, impeding our path. The key, Yuki-san. Oh, so I have to use your first name, but you're going to use my last name? I mean, you sorta never told me your first name. Come to think of it, he had a point. That said, I got the feeling that telling him my name was tantamount to letting him win, so instead I pulled the key out of my pocket and silently handed it to him. You want me to open it? I mean, this is your idea. I nodded, and he plucked the key from my palm. Just like that, my hand felt worlds lighter. I guess it doesn't really matter who opens the door. Aren't you scared, Hisamatsu-san? Daigo. And yeah, I'm scared. I'm human too, you know. Contrary to his claim, he promptly stuck the key in the lock and rotated it. There was a metallic click as the cylinder turned. He put the key into his pocket, then grasped the doorknob. Behind us, the sunset was fading fast. It would only get darker from here. You okay, Hisamatsu-san? That's Daigo. No, not really, but sure. Never been better. What about you? Of course not. Not in the slightest. Perfect. Let's go. What part about this is perfect? About to get eaten by a ghost. Before I could retort, Hisamatsu-san twisted the knob. The door swung open with a dull metallic groan, and he promptly walked right in. Guess we won't need to worry about our shoes if the floor is gonna get cleaned anyway. Well, that sudden music gives me great comfort. Hisamatsu-san stepped inside without pausing to take his shoes off. I followed suit. Darkness fell over us as I shut the door behind me. This is just gonna piss off the ghost. Walking inside here with our shoes on, that's just gonna make the ghost mad. There was still plenty of daylight left outside, and yet the interior of the apartment was as dark as night. It's pitch black in here. Probably should have brought a flashlight. I bet the newspapers are blocking out the light. Oh god. Oh, of course. I remembered the newspapers I'd seen covering all the windows. Which is great! We're gonna die. Still, we needed a light source if we were to investigate anything. I moved to open the door again. Wait, I've got a light right here. It's gonna be like a cell phone light? As he spoke, a small beam of light suddenly flared to life before me, and I realized he was using the flashlight app on his cell phone. Hey, Hisamatsu-san, is that cell phone charged? It's not gonna suddenly die, is it? Without further ado, Hisamatsu-san walked to the windows and unceremoniously tore down the newspapers. The light of the sunset filtered into the room all at once, brightening our surroundings considerably. Emboldened by the last rays of daylight, I moved further into the apartment. I debated taking my shoes off, but ultimately decided against it. Meanwhile, Hisamatsu-san continued to tear down the newspapers indiscriminately. But as I approached, he suddenly fell still. What's wrong? It's the same. His voice was so faint it wasn't clear whether he'd actually heard my question. He stared, wide-eyed, at the window pane. What's the same? Oh, handprints, awesome! I followed his gaze to the window, but couldn't see much. You don't see the handprints? Beyond the window lay the balcony. It didn't look particularly damaged or dirty, minus some handprints on the... There we go. Handprints? Oh god. I heard my voice shift up an octave. Hisamatsu-san's fingers trailed over the glass. That's when I realized. This is exactly how it was for my sister. The handprints were on the outside of the glass. Illuminated by the sunset, I could see dozens and dozens of them. But why would the culprit hit the window in the first place? Let's check the walls before it gets too dark. Just then, I noticed that the sun had set almost completely. Hisamatsu-san straightened up and moved to the nearest newspaper-covered wall. I suddenly had a thought. I'm gonna mostly keep it to myself. I'm just gonna say this. I'm a little suspicious of the landlady at the moment. Are you sure about this? It's the whole reason we came here, isn't it? Standing behind him, I couldn't see his expression, but I could tell his shoulders were stiff. Here goes. His voice wavered faintly. Glancing at me over his shoulder, he reached up high with one hand. His fingers clamped around the top of the newspaper, and then he whipped his hand down in one fluid motion. A loud ripping sound rent the air as the newspaper tore all the way down. With Hisamatsu-san standing in the way, I couldn't really see the wall. A strangled groan escaped his lips as he froze, rooted to the spot. Hisamatsu-san? I couldn't bring myself to get any closer. I knew I needed to see the wall for myself, but I couldn't take a single step. Hey, Hisamatsu-san, what's the matter? In response to my question, Hisamatsu-san shuddered visibly. This is nuts. What kind of nuts? Walnuts, peanuts, almond nuts? I can't have almond nuts if that's the case. He stumbled backwards and I caught a glimpse of something over his shoulder. There looked to be some sort of stain on the white wallpaper. Huh? What's that? I still couldn't really make it out from here. Finally, I took a step forward, bringing myself shoulder to shoulder with Hitsumatsu-san. That is pretty creepy, I will say. A scream welled up in the back of my throat, but Hitsumatsu-san quickly clamped a trembling hand over my mouth. Don't. We need to be quiet. I stood, knees shaking, too transfixed on the wall to listen. Hitsumatsu-san pulled me into an embrace, as if to shield me from the sight. Calm down. I know I'm not one to talk, but just calm down for me, okay? That's Frit's face! I couldn't hear the squeak in my voice. It felt like the scream was still clogging my throat. Even with Hitsumatsu-san blocking the way, I could still see the wall in my mind, clear as day. That's a woman. A strange stain stood out in bold relief on the wall. A stain in the shape of a woman with disheveled hair and hate in her eyes. Here you go. Hitsumatsu-san set a mug down in front of me. Mechanically, I picked it up, and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafted up to greet me. Need any milk or sugar? I slowly shook my head, and he sat down on the opposite side of the coffee table. Feeling a little calmer now? Because I'm not. Taking a sip of his own coffee, Hitsumatsu-san spread something out on the table. I glanced over to find what appeared to be a series of newspaper clippings. From there, my gaze wandered around the room. Beyond the dark gray curtains, a masculine color to be sure, I could see that the darkness of night had set in. For a split second, I pictured the woman's baleful eyes peering back at me from beyond the shadows, and reflexively I looked away. Pretty gruesome back there, huh? He folded a knee up to his chest and leaned his chin against it. Evidently, he'd read my mind. He closed his eyes, as if in recollection. Personally, I didn't want to remember it. The dark shadow spreading over that pale window wallpaper. Its eyes, twisted with hate. As the memory threatened to rear its head, I hastily took a sip of my coffee. Gah! In my rush, I'd forgotten to test the temperature of the drink beforehand. I couldn't feel my lips and tongue burning. I could feel my lips and tongue burning. You okay? I looked over to find him staring at me. The two of us had dashed out of apartment 203 and, without even pausing to lock the door behind us, headed straight for the third floor. We'd already made plans to swing by his place anyway, so I guess it worked out. I had absolutely no desire to stay in my apartment alone. Once we got here, Hitsumatsu-san went out of his way to help me calm down. Without his help, I probably would have lost it entirely. Yeah, I'm okay. Sorry for freaking out. Hey, I don't blame you. I was pretty freaked out myself. So, about the same thing I said earlier about being sus of the landlady, I suddenly had a thought then where it's like, what if there actually isn't a ghost? This is just the landlady creating situations in which it looks like there's a ghost to drive up the property values, you know, well, I say drive up the property value, but I mean, we saw earlier, right, that she started charging more to leave earlier, you know, to supposedly because she's had so many tenants and it was just, you know, a hassle, so to prevent people from leaving early, she would, you know, she hiked up the price. What if that was a calculated move? What if there's no ghost? What if she just did this so she could justify hiking up the price? And, like, it's a lot of money, right? So even if they're going through a lot of stuff, they're still not gonna want to leave because that's like a lot to leave early. This is a very wild and probably not true theory, but that was my thought earlier, and I don't know. Anyway. Hey, I don't blame you. I was pretty freaked out myself. I took another sip of coffee and felt the hot, bitter fluid warm my stomach. Finally, I had recovered my composure. Wanna look through my files? Hitsumatsu-san gestured at the papers spread across the table. I must have looked notably calmer. Calmer? Calmer. Calmer. 'Cause that's a word. Calmer. I swear I know how to speak. Might as well. I mean, that's why we're here. Upon first glance, Hisamatsu-san's newspaper clippings all appeared to pertain to the same incident. I almost said neighbor there. No, his neighbor clippings. Female college student goes missing. M City, Maibara. Police began investigation after Yumihara Motoko-san, age 20, went missing on the morning of the 20th. Motoko-san attended J University. According to a friend, she went missing shortly after a phone call a few hours prior, around midnight. Missing college student found dead in the mountains. M City, Maibara. Missing college student Yumihara Motoko-san, age 20, was found dead on the morning of the 1st by local hiker Fujiwara Shinya-san, age 43. Police have ruled the death a suicide after discovering a rope tied to a tree branch on the scene. As of today, her remains are to be sent back to her family. M City, Maibara, the very town where our apartment complex was located. I read through the rest of the clippings, and sure enough, they were all related to the missing college student. What's so special about this case? I looked over at Hisamatsu-san. He took a sip of his coffee, then set his mug down on the table. Take another look. Notice anything? Huh? What do you mean? I carefully read over the clippings one more time. Suddenly, something caught my eye. Wait, J University? Isn't the university your grad school is affiliated with? Hisamatsu-san snapped his fingers. Bingo. I attended the same university myself, enrolled about 5 years before the date of that article. Which meant he was now somewhere around 23 years old. So young. I felt my gaze narrow with a hint of envy, but Hisamatsu-san continued. I remember quite a bit about that incident, actually. There were cops crawling all over campus. It was nuts. Wow. After what happened to my sister, I poked around a bit, tried to dig up whatever I could about that apartment. As it happened, a guy in my club knew someone who was friends with her, and then I found out. Motoko-san lived in apartment 202 at the time. You think the apartment 202 had something to do with this case? It's just a pet theory I have, but the time frame matches up perfectly, and there are a few weird little details. Such as? I leaned across the table without realizing it, and Hisamatsu-san did the same. 1. Motoko-san had no motive to kill herself. According to my clubmate, she had decent grades and a boyfriend. The perfect college life. Did I say grades? Grades? Grades. Okay. And? She had a roommate. A roommate? In other words, she shared her living space with a total stranger. Yep. Supposedly, she lived with someone. But whoever it was, no one ever saw them. And when they investigated her apartment, neither her family nor the police could find any trace of a second person living there. Then why did anyone think she had a roommate? According to my clubmate, on certain days of the week, she'd leave school early, claiming she was on dinner duty that day. Maybe she lived with her boyfriend? It certainly wasn't uncommon for young adults to move in together before a marriage. So, here's the thing. My clubmate knew Motoko-san's boyfriend, and according to him, the guy had never even been to her place. I pondered the facts for a moment. 5 years ago, Yumihara Motoko died in a bizarre suicide. She had a roommate, but there was no evidence of another person living there. Was her death the trigger that caused strange phenomena to occur around apartment 202? Wait, if Motoko-san died 5 years ago, and 202 was taken off the market right afterwards, how could her spirit haunt the place if she didn't even die there to begin with? See? I wish I had an answer myself. All I know is, Motoko-san's suicide definitely had something to do with 202. Maybe the apartment's cursed or something, to the point that it's spread to all neighboring apartments too. I have no clue. Okay, it's only going, for whatever reason, it's only going to the apartments to the left and right of it, yeah? It's not going to any of the apartments above or below it, if I'm understanding correctly, yeah? Why is that? Why would it not go to any of the ones above or below it? That doesn't make any sense. Unless the haunting isn't real, and the landlady's doing something that she can't do to the apartments above and below it. She can only do it to the ones beside it. I'm gonna hold on to my theory. Watch me be wrong at the end. If I'm right, though, we're having a pizza party. You and me both. At this point, there was nothing more we could really do. We weren't professionals, after all. But I knew someone who was. Guess I can try asking Shoko. Shoko who? She's my sister. Works for a magazine publisher. I'm told they have a department for rumors or unsolved mysteries or what have you, so I'll see if she knows anything. Sounds good. Maybe she'll have a lead for us. It's a small company, though, so don't get your hopes up. I glanced up at the clock hanging on the wall. 7:30 p.m. Evidently, I'd been here for much longer than I'd originally intended. It's getting pretty late. I'd go back to the haunted apartment. Isamatsu-san followed my gaze to the clock. Oh, wow, no kidding. I should get going. Wouldn't want to interrupt your thesis. Actually, I finished it this morning, so... So? Isamatsu-san shot me a pointed look. Girl, he asking you to stay. You don't want to go to that supposedly haunted apartment. There was a pause. Somehow I knew what he was trying to suggest. I'll probably be fine. I don't want to impose on you by staying here. I'll just go home for the night. Well, could you at least save my number in your phone, then? Things are okay for right now, but I'm worried about you. I will. Thanks. Frankly, I was worried about myself, too. Still, I didn't want to mooch off the kindness of someone I'd only met the day before. Well, call me if anything happens. Will do. Have a good night. If I die, I'll call you. With that casual farewell, I walked out of apartment 301. Feeling ever so slightly disappointed. Girl, why didn't you just stay? He was inviting you. By the time I reached the door to 201, that slight disappointment had transformed into massive regret. Hallway lights did little to mitigate the oppressive feel of the darkness. I mean, I can understand why she wouldn't want to stay with some dude that she barely knows. I get it, but at the same time, don't go back. The aging fluorescent bulbs flickered overhead, casting shadows over the walls. Meanwhile, the door to my apartment seemed to tower over me. Not that I was expecting a warm welcome. I turned away from the door. Somehow, I couldn't bring myself to put the key in the lock. In fact, I had half a mind to go to a diner or something instead. But this is supposed to be where I live. An unfortunate fact, though it may have been. How was I supposed to spend the next year living here when I was ready to get the hell out of Dodge after just 2 days? Summoning all my courage, I turned back to the door. For a moment, I fiddled idly with the key, rattling it against the keyring. Then finally, I plunged it into the lock and turned it. I reluctantly put my hand on the doorknob. I had to do this. Twisting my hand, the door clicked open. Gravity pulled my hand downward, and the knob with it. Then I pulled the door towards me and unsealed the abyss. Just leave all the lights on. From the door, I had a full view through the living room. Yeah, just leave every single light in your house on. That's fine. Give her a donut. I hear ghosts like donuts. Relieved at the absence of anything peculiar, I quickly flipped the light switch by the door. Then I whipped my shoes off, stumbled inside, and switched on all the other lights in the house for good measure. While I was at it, I shut both the living room and bedroom curtains. Then finally, I could breathe. The apartment was perfectly ordinary. I'd been planning to bolt on the spot had anything supernatural manifested, but evidently that wouldn't be necessary, so I went back and locked the front door. Weakly, I staggered into the living room and collapsed onto the sofa. All at once, my exhaustion hit me like a ton of bricks. My paranoia wouldn't let me relax, even for a moment. The way things are going, I could already tell there was no chance I'd last a full year living here. She only lasted 3 months. The memory of his words sent a shudder down my spine. But no, I would be fine. At least for today. At least for today. I repeated the words to myself out loud like a mantra, then heaved a sigh, and realized I was hungry. Scared as I was still human. Imagine she goes to make herself something in the kitchen and the ghost ate all her food. That would suck. Guess I'll make myself a little something. Go to make a sandwich, all your sandwich bread is gone. It's like, bruh, you could have asked me or something. Like, leave me a tip if you're gonna take my food. After a quick dinner, I popped the cork on the wine I'd bought for myself as a housewarming gift. I don't know if I'd get drunk, living next to a haunted apartment. One sip and I could already feel myself starting to relax. Guess the alcohol was doing its job. Whether my apartment was cursed or not, surely I deserved some modicum of normalcy at least. With that thought, I got to my feet and headed to the bathroom. The reason I'd chosen to commit to this apartment, despite the slightly pricey rent, was simple. The bathtub came with an automatic water heater. Personally, I like to take long baths. Whenever I was stuck on a design idea, I often found myself spending upwards of 2 hours lounging in the water. No, something's gonna happen in this bathroom. Hand's gonna peer over the tub, the rim of the tub or something. Or it's gonna come out the drain. I mean, if a hand comes out the drain, we can pretty much assure that there actually is a ghost and it's not the landlady doing some fucky-wucky stuff. Hence, a tub heater was at the top of my must-have list. My last apartment hadn't had one, and it was absolutely miserable. Truth be told, I was dying to take a nice long soak. But after everything that happened today, I decided to skip it, just to take a quick shower instead. The hot water rushed over my head, instantly soothing me. This was the one part of my life in which I felt no shame in spoiling myself. Lathering a fragrant shampoo into my hair, I felt my mood start to lift. And then a hand appeared on the back of my head and I screamed and died on the spot. For once, I could just relax. I leaned back under the hot water and rinsed the shampoo out of my hair, then massaged in the conditioner. Then I turned off the water so I could scrub myself down. I'm worried. As the drone of the water subsided, I could make out the sound of the television, which I had left blaring in the other room. Half listening, I ran the soapy sponge over my body. Giving an awful lot of details on this bath. The evening music program was on, and they had just switched to one of my favorite songs. Just as I was getting into it, however, I noticed something off. Oh, hell, here we go. What's it gonna be? What's gonna happen? Splat. Huh? It sounded like something wet had hit the floor. Okay. I checked the faucet, but it wasn't leaking. Okay. Something was definitely dripping onto the floor somewhere. That is a very specific sound. What is that? You sure it's not the TV? It was like the sound of a frog hitting concrete. A frog hitting concrete? I don't think I've ever heard a sound like that. I don't think I want to hear a sound like that. Instantly, fear rose up like bile in the back of my throat. I quickly finished soaping up my body, then turned the water back on. It's possible we have a ghost in the bathroom with us, but I gotta get clean. Scrub, scrub, scrub. La-da-da-da-da, scrubbing in the shower. Here, split, splat, now we're scrubbing faster. But the drone of the shower did little to drone out that splatting sound. It sounded like it was coming from outside the bathroom. What's the ghost squelching outside the bathroom for? Hastily, I rinsed my hair and body. Just then... Schloop! Ah! Something touched my calf. Something cold. Startled, I pushed my wet hair out of my face and looked down at my feet, but nothing was there. What was that? In an instant, my good mood was gone. I hurried out of the bathroom, ran a towel over myself, and moved into the living room. Hands shaking, I took a clean change of clothes from my clothes drawer and pulled them on in spite of my still wet body. Late night diner. Late night diner, here I come. I couldn't bear to stay in the apartment for one moment longer. I struggled into my jeans, then forced my arms through a long-sleeve jersey knit top. I glanced at the clock. 10 p.m. What? Ah! I shrieked reflexively. Something had slammed hard into the window. I could feel my teeth chattering. Bam. Stop. Please, just stop. I'll give you the detergent here. It's right there. I grabbed 3 things. My wallet, my keys, and my phone. Then I bolted out of the apartment and never looked back. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things it could have been, you know, she said she felt something touch her calf. It could have just been something in the shower, you know? I know when I take a shower, sometimes I bump into, like, the shower curtains, and I'm like, what's that? The shower curtain is like, oh,